What's going on, adventurers? Welcome to another episode of the Adventure One podcast. Thank you for tuning in. I first wanted to say thank you to anybody who has been listening to this for a long time, and welcome to anyone who is new. If you ever want to go back and check out some of the last episodes, I know it's counterintuitive to how we consume so many podcasts these days. We just look at what shows up at the top of the feed. That's what we listen to. But I want to encourage anybody who just wants to listen to some more hunting stories, more adventure stories, go back in the Adventure One catalog. Check out some of the old stuff. There's some cool hikes, some cool hunt stuff, some cool how-tos. Lots of great information in there for anybody who is either just joined recently or has just not really followed along to any of the old stuff. Take a look at it. You might find something that you really enjoy there. So our topic for today is related to proposed and likely incoming anti-gun legislation. But before I get kind of down in the weeds with all that stuff, I just wanted to tell a fun story that actually happened right after I published the last podcast. So if you listen to it, it was kind of about my adventure on the ranch down doing some South Texas hunting. I recorded that in the cabin that was on that property, and it's down in a valley where I don't have any cell phone signal. I had recorded that on my laptop with a high-quality microphone. I really don't like podcasts from other people who just try to record it on their phone, so I use good gear, but I use my phone as a hotspot to post stuff whenever I'm in a remote location. So without getting signal there means I can't post anything. I drove up to the top of a hill where I knew I got cell phone signal and then uploaded from there. And it was probably 2 minutes after the podcast finished uploading. I was shutting down my computer, kind of cleaning stuff back up, and I just faintly heard the squeal of a hog on the wind. And if you've heard that sound, it's pretty distinctive. And I listened and listened and listened, and I thought I heard another one. I wasn't sure. And I realized it was just a sound distantly carried by the wind. So I actually grabbed my shotgun because I had been turkey hunting, and I grabbed some number 4 buckshot. I've talked about this before. I use number 4 because I can run it through a turkey choke. Anything like double-aught doesn't really pattern well. So I always keep some of that number 4 buck with me anytime I have a shotgun. So I grabbed that, threw that in the gun, and took off running into the wind where I thought I heard this squeal coming from. And so I ran probably about 150 yards, stopped, listened. Sure enough, heard another squeal. Started walking kind of more carefully now, quietly. It's really rocky, so trying not to start a cascade of rocks all around me. Walked a little bit further, and then, I was definitely still hearing a couple hog squeals. And then I got to the point where I felt like I was right on top of them. They had to be right in front of me, and it was just thick cedar all around me. And I just stood there and waited, and then sure enough, a little hog just popped out of a bush. I don't know why. I don't know if the hog had seen me or heard me or something. I don't think so. Wasn't looking at me, but this little pig stepped out of the bush, and I saw it. It was about 25 yards from me, and I realized, well, I could take the shot or I could wait for more. I know there's more back there. I'm hearing more, but this one's right in front of me, so I might as well take it. So I pulled up my shotgun really fast, put my red dot right on its shoulder, and blam, hit it with the full load of buckshot. It fell over right immediately, but what was even crazier is right when that happened, it was like kicking a fire ant bed. Hogs just started squirting out from that brush every which way, all over the place. A big boar started running very close to me. It didn't know where I was. He wasn't charging me, but he ran within 10 yards of me, and I hit him with another little buckshot right in the side, and he kind of stumbled, kicked some rocks, and then he got up and kept running. This was a big pig, at least 150 yards. And anything that can take a load of buckshot and keep on running is big. Not something you want charging you. So I looked around for blood for that hog, never found him. So eventually one day I may kill a hog that's got a kind of a messed up side. Maybe he ran off in the woods and died a while later. But with a boar that big, hitting him right in that thick, gristly shield, he'll probably be all right. Those things are amazingly tough. But picked up the little pig, threw it on my tailgate. Well, I drug it back. And what I do for that, a lot of times if I have a rope or something like that with me, I'll just tie it through the Achilles and drag it that way so that I'm not just holding it or carrying it. I don't want to get ticks all over me because a lot of times these warm weather hogs have ticks on them. So just drug it back to the truck, threw it on the tailgate, quartered it right then and there. And it was just so funny that this all happened on the way out of the ranch right after I had posted another podcast. So I wasn't able to tell the story then. It doesn't really fit into today's topic either, but I didn't want to forget it because it was just a fun, exciting story and a good reminder that even when you're on the way out, even when you think an adventure's over, keep a shotgun on you. You might be able to use it, and you might be able to put some more meat in the cooler and bring to a buddy, because that's what happened to me. So we just had to tell that story, but now on to today's topic, which is a little bit less fun, a little bit less exciting. So today is Saturday, April 10th, and 2 days ago, the White House just announced several executive actions on firearms legislation. And legislation is even probably not the best way to put it, because ultimately that means Congress is passing a law, and that did not happen. An executive action or executive order is basically just a way around that, as we all know. So there were several things that the Biden administration said. It was stuff that, if you remember way back in the debates between Biden and Trump, that there were several things that came up. And Biden said day one he was going to pass some firearms-related executive actions, and then we never saw that. In fact, it's been 3 months. We haven't seen any of that. Meanwhile, the entire gun community has been buying all the guns, all the ammo, for months and months and months. COVID started the ammo buying panic, and then the fear of imminent gun control just fueled the fire, kept it going, and the supply has caught up, actually. Stuff is still not easy to find, but we're starting to see improvement, which means supply has caught up, or demand is fallen down, or people have just spent all the money that they're willing to spend on this. But just a couple days ago on Thursday, the White House announced that there were several things that were happening or that were going to happen. So right now I have the press release from the White House pulled up. So I'm just going to kind of read this just so we're on the same page, and then just kind of tell you what I think it means, what it means we need to watch out for, and if I can assess a net effect from this, whether it will, on the off chance, be positive, more likely be negative, or just not do anything at all. Let's kind of talk about that a little bit too. So the first thing here, the Justice Department within 30 days will issue a proposed rule to help stop the proliferation of, quote, ghost guns, unquote. We are experiencing a growing problem. Criminals are buying kits containing nearly all of the components and directions for finishing a firearm within as little as 30 minutes and using these firearms to commit crimes. When these firearms turn up at crime scenes, they often cannot be traced by law enforcement due to the lack of a serial number. The Justice Department will issue a proposed rule to help stop the proliferation of these firearms. So I'm just going to key in on the very last sentence here. I'll go back and talk through the rest of it, but to create a proposed rule to stop the proliferation of these firearms. Okay, so the actual gun, for anybody who's built something from an 80% or lower, like a polymer 80 or an AR kit, you would know that it has always been legal for Americans to build their own guns. There has never been any rule, I'm sure state-wise, there are probably a few states where you can't, but federally, there's never been a rule against buying a gun for yourself. If you want to go down to Lowe's and buy a 1-inch steel pipe and turn it into a 12-gauge shotgun, I'm not going to tell you exactly how you do it, but I promise that you can do it for less than $50, and it's not illegal. What's illegal is selling or transferring guns, because there is a very scrutinized process to become a manufacturer or dealer of firearms. So you can build something for yourself, but you cannot sell it. So if they're passing a rule, or they say a rule, they don't say a law, they say a rule to help stop the proliferation of these firearms, I want to know how they're going to do that. How is that even possible? Because the transfer of these, if I build something for myself totally legally, I cannot sell it as an unserialized item. If I want to sell it, there is a process. I can fill out a Form 1 with the ATF. This is the same form you fill out if you want to build your own suppressor. You can build out a Form 1 to create a firearm and to serialize it. Once you get that Form 1, you can then put a serial number on it. Then you can transfer it. You could bring it to an FFL. You could do a private party transfer. You can do whatever the heck you want with it as long as it's within current law. But until it's serialized, it is yours and yours alone, and you can't transfer it. So if there's a problem with these ghost guns being transferred, guess what? That's already illegal. So any proposed rule to help stop that, well, what are they possibly going to do there that could ever be effective? People are already building guns and breaking the rule, supposedly, that would prohibit them from transferring them. So they're already doing it illegally. Adding some rule is not going to help stop transferring that. So that's where I think we have to kind of lift off the mask here and say, no, they're not trying to just stop the transfer. When they say the proliferation of these, they have to go after the builders. And I think that's what they're going to do. The ATF has already raided several places, including Polymer 80, and a couple distributors who are selling the, I think it was called a buy, build, shoot kit. And everything, if you go by the definitions put out by the ATF, everything was totally legal about this kit. It includes an 80% lower, and it includes a lot of the upper parts. I'm not even sure if it had all of them. I think it was most of them. I think there were various levels of this kit. Some had everything you need, but it was not put together as a firearm. If I buy all the parts for a car, it is not a car. You're lacking the critical know-how and the labor to make it. It's every industry has an equivalent of this, whether you look at, yeah, somebody has a computer. Does that make them a software engineer? Well, hell no. Somebody, like I said, the car, somebody has all these parts. Does that make them an auto manufacturer? No. So tracking the parts required to create something is totally different than the proliferation of the final thing, especially since those parts are unserialized, unregistered, and they have never been illegal. And the ATF can enforce the sale of alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives, but not the paper required to roll cigarettes, not the gun barrel, not an 80% lower that you could use to make a gun perfectly legally. So this means that in some way, this rule to help stop the proliferation is going to be something with the ATF, I believe, in trying to change how they characterize the sale or transfer or identity of these parts. And it's really interesting that they phrased it as a rule, because I've seen other executive actions where it may say the president or the White House will encourage Congress to pass legislation that blah, 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 blah. This says will issue a proposed rule. So I think that's going to be some funny thing through somebody who's appointed, not elected, and something that does not go through Congress. And I have a whole problem with even calling these ghost guns to begin with. It's such a hypey anti-gun thing, just designed to scare people and fire people up. So that name comes from two things. There was a politician I believe it was out of California, who gave a speech that started with, "This is a ghost gun. It's unserialized, it's untraceable, blah, 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 blah." And then people made fun of him because he put a lot out there that was not factually accurate. He didn't know what he was holding. He didn't know what he was talking about. He was just trying to scare people to make something illegal that couldn't currently be regulated. And then in response to that, there was a company that basically made a small milling machine, a desktop-sized milling machine, where you could put in an 80% part, and instead of cutting something out with a Dremel or a drill press, something like that, this little milling machine already had pre-programmed in it the paths required to make those cuts. And this company called that device the Ghost Gunner, purely as a mockery to that politician. But then I think their intent, which was satirical, it further kind of accelerated the categorization of these as ghost guns. And now I just want to talk about, so who is building these, quote, ghost guns? And are they actually a threat? Have they been found in crimes? Yes. Mostly crimes related to transferring things that can't legally be transferred. Are they used statistically commonly in murders or any armed robberies, anything like that? No. Not at all. They have been found in those, but not nearly in comparison to any other firearm out there. It is just a tiny, tiny little blip on the radar because it takes skill, it takes know-how, and building one of these things often is more expensive than just buying a gun that's already out there. I've built one of these, and you do it not because you want something that's cheap, not because you want something that's hidden and doesn't have a serial number. That's just a part of, I build it myself, so I can't put a serial number on it. And if I was going to put a serial number on it, it would be this expensive process that required federal registration when none of my other guns require federal registration. So why would I want to do that? So it's not people who are looking for something easy and cheap. It's people who are gun dorks like me who say, yeah, I like the idea of a Glock, but a Glock's kind of a simple gun. So if we're going to have something like a Glock, let's just start from the beginning and make it a little bit better. Let's use a stainless barrel. Let's use an enhanced grip. Poly 80, one of their main characteristics is they change the grip angle so that if you're familiar with shooting a lot of American firearms, you can have something that's like a Glock that feels more like a 1911 or more like a Smith & Wesson with that American grip angle rather than the really steep grip angle of a Glock. So it was totally a feature thing that was intentional in their design. So a lot of people building these things are not criminals who just want something down and dirty and hidden and disposable. It's gun dorks who want to just Mr. Potato Head the crap out of this thing and build it their own way. So that's who is buying these things. And what's really interesting is any laws that go after these things really are going after a lot of people who are passionate gun owners, people who collect a lot of stuff, probably have a lot of guns. I don't think it's going to reduce crime by any bit whatsoever. So we'll need to stay tuned. It said within 30 days this is going to happen, and this will be in the Justice Department. So DOJ has a lot of power. We don't know what they're going to do, so that's definitely something. Stay tuned, stay aware, because the Biden administration is coming after your guns. All right, next on the list, from the same press release, the Justice Department within 60 days will issue a proposed rule to make clear when a device marketed as a stabilizing brace effectively turns a pistol into a short-barreled rifle subject to the requirements of the National Firearms Act. The alleged shooter in the Boulder tragedy last month appears to have used a pistol with an arm brace, which can make a firearm more stable and accurate while still being concealable. So this one's clear as mud, and I have lots of issues with this too. So the proposed rule to make clear when a device marketed as a stabilizing brace effectively turns a pistol into a something else, that part sounds good. Some clarity would be nice. The ATF has kind of gone after these things willy-nilly in the last 6 months, basically saying, hey, that model is now an illegal SBR. They did this to, I believe it was the Honey Badger by Q, which was a 300 blackout pistol. I believe it was a 10-inch barrel or something along those lines. So a short-barreled rifle is required to be registered. You have to register the serial number of that firearm with the federal government, and you have to pay $200 just to have a barrel less than 16 inches. And so a really good example to look at here is the M4 used by the United States Army infantry. That's the most common usage of the M4. It's used by lots of different branches for lots of different things, but that has a 14.5-inch barrel. The civilian version of that has a 16-inch barrel. If we were to cut 1.5 inches on our barrel, which, by the way, reduces your velocity and makes the gun less powerful, not more, if we were to cut that 1.5 inches off of our barrel to be able to just use that gun in its original design, we would now have to register that gun and pay a $200 tax stamp. So that's why a lot of people don't want to have an SBR, because they can have something perfectly legal, perfectly normal. You can use it just like any other gun. But when your barrel gets below a certain length, now you have to register it with the federal government. So Q on the Honey Badger, and then tons and tons of companies after that have created guns with shorter barrels, but they intentionally sold them as pistols. And that alone isn't a problem here. Where it gets interesting is the stabilizing brace. So that was originally invented by SB Tactical. It was for a disabled veteran who had one arm and wanted to be able to shoot an AR pistol. And it gets really difficult to hold something that big, like an AR pistol, which is basically a very large pistol in a rifle chambering, with one hand. And so because an AR of any form, rifle or pistol, has to have some form of a buffer tube coming out the back end, SB Tactical created this brace that you could strap it around your forearm. So that would allow somebody to extend their arm and shoot this gun as a pistol. That's what it was originally invented for. That's how it was originally used. And then a lot of people realized, well, you could take this thing and shoulder it too. There is no rule on how you can shoot a gun. The way you hold something doesn't change its definition of what it is. That would be ridiculous. That saying, okay, this is an apple, but if I put it in a soup, it's now a potato. That's not how the world works, and that's not how definitions of anything work. So people realized, hey, if you have this, you could kind of put it against your shoulder, and it's kind of a half-assed weird stock, and it works. And so a lot of companies sold guns with these stabilizing braces for that option. You could put it against your shoulder, kind of use it as a stock, even though it wasn't a real stock. You could strap it around your forearm to use it as the stabilizing brace. And then it started getting really murky because it came out that SB Tactical, the inventor of this product, technically only had an ATF approval letter on their original model and one model thereafter. Pretty much every model that they created after that did not have an ATF approval letter, but it was based on that original design. It worked in the same way. They just made it in various shapes and sizes for different firearms. So you may ask, well, why didn't they just go get an approval letter for all of them? Well, because you don't have to. It's ridiculous to have an approval letter from the ATF to create something that's otherwise perfectly legal. Laws in this country never tell you what you can do. You can do anything unless it's against the law. So there was no requirement for them to have these approval letters for anything else. Combine that with the confusion that there had been a previous ATF letter that says the manner in which you hold or operate a gun designs or redesigns a firearm to be something else. And there was a while, and if you go back on YouTube, you'll see a lot of this. People with these braces, putting them against their cheeks, but not touching them to their shoulder, getting them close, but not actually touching, because they were afraid that, oh, if it touches my shoulder, they can say I'm using this as a rifle, and now it's an illegal rifle. So there's been a lot of confusion about this, but the confusion isn't to make a device illegal or legal, because this device is not a firearm. Just like the ghost gun thing, they're trying to regulate a part, not something that's the actual gun. And this is the ultimate slippery slope. The second they say a part changes what something is, whether you're using that part or not, how you're using that part, it gives them so much power and so much control that it totally wrecks the idea that we can own and use guns legally. And then there are a few exceptions where we cannot. It changes the narrative to, nope, everything has to be approved or looked at by the ATF, and they will tell you what you can and cannot do. And I have a big problem with that. This reminds me a whole lot of the bump stock thing that happened under Trump, which he was not pro-gun either. Some people will say he is just because he had an NRA endorsement, but more anti-gun stuff happened under Trump than it did under Obama. And this reminds me a lot of that, where you take one part and say, hey, it designs or redesigns a firearm, totally changes what the ATF can or cannot do. And in my opinion, this is totally against both the spirit and the exact wording of the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Instead of saying that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, this changes us into a whole methodology of the right to keep and bear arms shall be highly regulated and only at the approval and authorization of the federal government, which is wrong in many ways. Not to mention that the whole reason this conflict even exists is because the ATF has these arbitrary distinctions for what exactly is a pistol and what exactly is a rifle, and all these rules that force us to differentiate them between them. And so now there are these things that are, well, I think that's a rifle, but now it's this weird exception, and I think that's a pistol, but now it's a weird exception. Not to mention the fact that this is almost entirely targeting AR-15s. There are other things that are kind of these weird in between. It would be a shotgun if it was longer. It would be a rifle if it had a longer barrel. It would be a pistol if it had this one feature. There are a lot of things like that. But what's really interesting is it's the stabilizing brace is one of the features used on an AR-15 pistol. Whereas I saw a meme that had a Draco, if you know what that is. It's basically a miniaturized AK-47, but that doesn't have a buffer tube, so it doesn't have anything coming out the back end. And the meme showed a Draco with a stabilizing brace on the back end, and it said, illegal concealable assault rifle. And then it got rid of the stabilizing brace, making it even shorter, and it said legal pistol. So ultimately, what is the point? They've created all these crazy, confusing rules that gun owners have to jump through to stay legal, but these guns aren't used in higher rates of crime than anything else. If you want to look at what is used in crime, it's handguns, it's pistols, it's specifically really cheap-ass, old, dirty pistols. I mean, that's what you see in police evidence lockers. Rifles of any type are hardly ever used in crimes, much less short-barreled rifles or illegal short-barreled rifle. It doesn't happen. So what's the purpose of all this? It's to attack AR-15s. It's to go after the most popular guns in this country and ways that people are creatively finding to make them shorter, to make them more customizable, and to do more with them. That's what they're trying to crack down on, and it's not because of public safety. It's because they want to take away your guns. I'm getting into rant mode, can you tell? So here's the next one. The Justice Department within 60 days will publish model red flag legislation for states. Red flag laws allow family members or law enforcement to petition for a court order temporarily barring people in crisis from accessing firearms if they present present danger to themselves or others. The president urges Congress to pass an approved national red flag law, as well as legislation incentivizing states to pass red flag laws of their own. In the interim, the Justice Department's published model legislation will make it easier for states that want to adopt red flag laws to do so. So, what is a red flag law? It's interesting that here they only call it a red flag law, which isn't actually even the name of the law. It's a high-risk protection order or extreme risk protection order, depending on which state you're looking at. So, what are red flag laws? Why are they good? Why are they bad? We could probably do a whole episode talking about this. In general, I think it's actually a horrible, horrible thing. While the intent sounds good, somebody who's in clear and present danger to be able to say, oh no, hold on, this person shouldn't have a gun right now because they're on suicide watch, they're going through something, they're going through some crisis in their life. That sounds good. That sounds like a caring thing to do. I'm actually in a really interesting situation myself right now where there's guns in my possession that I'm holding on to, not quite for that reason, but just from a position of somebody who's maybe not going to use their guns right now or isn't totally fit to have them in common regular use. I'm holding on to something, but that's done in a purely private party perspective, not because of any legal thing, not because of any order, nothing like that. Having a court order to take someone's guns away without them being in a part of the conversation is totally illegal. It totally undermines due process. It's theft of property and a violation of the Second Amendment. Now, I know there's somebody out there who's trying to start, I believe it's a non-profit, or maybe it's just a program for businesses that if somebody's in a place where they're unfit to hold on to their guns right now, they can bring them to a gun shop or authorized, almost locker, if you will, someone who is a licensed retailer of firearms who can just hang on to them to basically say, hey, hold on to this for 6 months, whatever. Don't just put it in a storage locker, but you're an authorized gun dealer. Here's a process for this that would be a peaceful process and one that's voluntary rather than the one that's forced via court order. So in general, I think red flags are very bad just for gun owners and for anybody who actually cares about civil liberties. having a court say that you can go take somebody's property, specifically property that's protected by the Second Amendment, is wrong. And this has not been tried up to the national level, up to federal courts. There are several states that have recently passed this legislation. I believe it's Florida that has been the most controversial with this kind of stuff, but more and more states have passed these sort of red flag laws. And my home state of Texas has not, but it's been a bill. It's been tried here, and it's being tried everywhere else. And it's being pushed more and more because this is a way that people are seeing we can take someone's guns away from them without passing any federal law, without changing anything on the purchase level, without changing anything else. We can have a court tell us that for whatever reason, that person can't own firearms, and then they can just be seized. And that is a big problem, and I hope more and more sheriff's departments, which, by the way, is the only law enforcement agency or department mentioned in the Constitution, I hope they will push against this and not enforce this. But I think we're going to see this more and more at the discretion of, obviously, it's judges who have to sign this court order, but it'll be judges in big left-leaning cities with very large police departments who are ultimately enforcing this. So going back to the executive action mentioned here, so the president will urge Congress to pass an appropriate national red flag law. I think they will try, but I don't know that it will happen or not, because I don't think it ultimately is constitutional. And so they will incentivize states to pass red flag laws. So what this means, so already the Biden administration has increased the national debt ridiculously, $2 trillion. I mean, Trump did too. Trump was horrible in terms of the amount of just inflation that's going to happen and the amount of increase to the national debt. He was very bad. And Biden seems to be outpacing him even further. So it means they're going to incentivize. They're going to give out money or funny money to encourage states to do this. So if you have a red law program, you now get such and such federal benefit. And I think they'll probably use something completely unrelated to firearms as that benefit. It'll be highways. It'll be something through the Department of Education. It'll be some benefit that you can't relate to guns, so that people who aren't pro-gun people are going to look at this and say, oh, we want more funding for our highways and we have to do this anti-gun thing? Sure, let's do it. Oh, we want more money from the Department of Education and it's this some red flag something or other? Okay, let's definitely do it. It's going to be sold in that way, and that's a backup plan, but it's a very likely backup plan, because I don't think Biden will get Congress to have any sort of federal red flag law, but it's already proven that this can happen at state levels, which, again, it hasn't been taken to the Supreme Court yet. So right now it's just, it hasn't been tried, but they're doing it. So that's where they're going to encourage this to happen more. So I am very against red flag laws, and I am probably more worried about this one than anything else on this list. All right, that was quite a ramble, huh? On to the next one. The administration is investing in evidence-based community violence interventions. Community violence interventions are proven strategies for reducing gun violence in urban communities through tools other than incarceration. Because cities across the country are experiencing a historic spike in homicides, the Biden-Harris administration is taking a number of steps to prioritize investment in community violence interventions. They then go into a lot of details about some programs with Health and Human Services, a whole bunch of more investment, or debt is a better way to view it, in training, and just a lot of things that ultimately are death by PowerPoint type of presentations, and that's what they're going to spend money on. When you look at this, the premise is true, that there is a lot of community violence. Calling it gun violence, I think, there is no gun violence. It's just violence. And guns just tend to be one of the more effective modern tools that we have. The premise is correct that especially in urban communities, we do have a problem. There is a lot of violence in urban communities. But if you were to just look at urban versus rural, yes, you can. It's pretty obvious that this is a problem in urban communities that doesn't happen out in the sticks. But if you look at the cities where this does happen and almost just rank them from top to bottom, these things happen. The quote gun violence epidemic, or what? Not epidemic. It's ridiculous to even call it that. But the gun violence problem tends to happen in very blue, left-leaning, large cities with the most gun control on the books. And if anything, it proves that everything that has been done related to this kind of stuff does not work effectively. A couple weeks ago, they talked about, there were several mass shootings in this last week. There were 3 people killed here. There were 3 people killed here. In the same weekend, there were over 30 people shot in Southside Chicago. They don't even look at that. They're saying certain areas where it makes the news, where the shooter is white, those are the things that make the headlines. Whereas these cities that truly have a gun violence problem have the strictest gun control, are left-leaning, have a lot of poverty, have horrible education, and in my opinion, the leading cause is dad is not in the home. I know that is a rant totally separated from what they're talking about here, but there is a problem. There is. But the problem isn't the hardware. The problem is the people and what's in their hearts and what's in their minds. And spending a bunch of money with health and human services and having community violence intervention programs isn't going to stop anything for the people who don't care about the law, the people who are buying guns illegally, the people who are shooting their neighbors. I wish it wasn't true, but that's not going to help. Next, the Justice Department will issue an annual report on firearms trafficking. In 2000, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, issued a report summarizing information regarding its investigations into firearms trafficking, which is one of the ways firearms are diverted into the illegal market where they can easily end up in the hands of dangerous individuals. Since the report's publication, states, local, and federal policymakers have relied on its data to better thwart common channels of firearms trafficking. But there is a good reason to believe that firearms trafficking channels have changed since 2000. For example, due to the emergence of online sales and proliferation of ghost guns. The Justice Department will issue a new comprehensive report on firearms trafficking and annual updates necessary to give policymakers the information they need to help address firearms trafficking today. So ultimately, this looks like another money sink. This time it's into research. In general, I don't oppose that idea. At the top level, I think generally being more aware of a situation helps you just have a better look at it. The problem is the group who is going to be conducting this research is the same as the enforcement arm on this. It's the ATF in both instances. Previously, there had been a bunch of stuff done by the CDC and by the FBI. The FBI keeps records of all types of different crimes, so it makes sense that they keep records of gun crimes. The CDC keeps records of all types of deaths, so it makes sense to conclude that they should keep a record of gun-related deaths. That totally makes sense. But when it's the ATF who's going to be conducting their own research, and they're also enforcing rules, and they're also making rules, it's the fox guarding the hen house here. That they can look at anything through any lens they want. We all know, you look at so many statistics, and it's stats don't lie, statisticians do. You can draw any conclusion based on how you look at data. And so when it's the group that ultimately is going to be conducting the research, who's also going to be making rules and enforcing them, to me, that totally goes against the whole idea of how our government works, that you have checks and balances across different systems and different agencies. I have problems with that. And you even look at what the Justice Department has done before, where the Justice Department itself actually was trafficking firearms, like the Fast and Furious thing, where Eric Holder was illegally running guns to Mexico, bringing in guns basically as bait to look at cartels. They were totally violating the law and bringing in illegal weapons. I think that's just really good example of why this sort of thing is not to be trusted. And then they go out to mention the emergence of online sales and proliferation of ghost guns. So I already talked about ghost guns, and I need to clarify online sales. I think most people listening to this podcast probably have their head on their shoulders and know that you cannot order a gun on the internet and have it shipped to your house. So saying online sales as a vehicle for firearms trafficking, I don't buy it. It's just a way to get access to more data, to see who's buying what, to look at the numbers in an effort to control it. Because any gun that you buy online has to be transferred through a Form 4473, usually at your local gun shop, and they'll charge you $15-20 to transfer it. So it's already on the books. It's already going through the normal means. This step that they're calling just research and trafficking is just wanting to gather more data that, in my opinion, can only be used against gun owners who are abiding by the laws. Because if somebody's not following the law, guess what? It's off the books. They didn't purchase it from a website and have it transferred to an FFL. It's something that was handed over the street in cash, and the government doesn't know anything about anyway. So I'm nervous about what this data is going to include, just because what they're looking at is not going to be beneficial towards reducing crime. It's going to look at gun sales in general, and it's going to go after the people who I believe are doing things legally. And also the proliferation of ghost guns thing. How are you going to do something? How are you going to do legitimate research on something that's untrackable, untraceable, unserialized? The only way they can do that is just to go after parts. Makes me nervous. And here's the grand finale. The president will nominate David Chipman to serve as the director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. ATF is the key agency in enforcing our gun laws, and it needs to have a confirmed director in order to do the job to the best of its ability. But ATF has not had a confirmed director since 2015. Chipman served at the ATF for 25 years and now works to advance common sense gun safety laws. So, that is true. But the conclusion of it is alarming. So, Chipman did serve in the ATF for 25 years. Guess what? That means he was at the ATF during Waco, where the ATF massacred innocent civilians. I'm not saying he was there. I'm not saying he pulled the trigger, but that was the ATF that he served under. Holy smokes. And currently, his role, he works for Gabrielle Giffords in her anti-gun nonprofit organization, where he advocates for stricter gun control and against firearms ownership. I said it before, but this is the crown jewel and the ultimate example of the fox guarding the hen house. You would never have somebody who is totally anti-public education running the Department of Education. You would never have an Amish person deciding what we can do with electronics and technology. This is so much a case of just putting somebody with a proven agenda in an agency that is already going rogue and seizing power every chance they get. And that's what's dangerous about all of this. Because when you look back, the ATF conducting research and issuing a report, advising states what they should do, blah, 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 not all bad. But when this guy's in charge, it steers it in a totally different direction. Looking at things related to ghost guns, which, again, I hate the term. It's just buying parts and people are building stuff on their own. Not a problem. But when this guy's in charge, it makes me really scared of where it's going to go. I know this turned into a rant. This is one of those things that gets me kind of fired up. I turn red on this stuff a little bit. But it's more just so that we can know what's actually going to happen. I mean, we've known that generally some anti-gun stuff has been coming. We've known it for a long time. We've been preparing. I hope you've been preparing, because we're getting to the point where it's pretty soon, it's going to be too late. So we know that at the earliest, some of this is happening within 30 days, some of it within 60. Now, a lot of those are proposed rules. So, if you just have a regular AR-15 rifle, I don't think any of this affects you. If you have magazines, I don't think any of this immediately affects you. I think we'll see more. There's tons of legitimate bills in Congress right now. Because remember, none of this is legislation. This is all stuff that the president can control directly through the Department of Justice. So who does this concern? Well, if you're wanting to build a Poly 80, go do it. I would suggest probably don't buy it direct from Poly 80. Buy it from a distributor. Buy it somewhere else, because if these guys get audited, even if you bought it perfectly legally, there's no guarantee that you'll be grandfathered in if they tried to do something. So I think don't break the law, be legal, but don't be obvious in where you're getting stuff. Don't make it extremely traceable, but still obey the law. This stuff, it's not a problem if you do it legally, but don't set yourself up for where they can track it down easily. If you're looking to build something with a stabilizing brace, I don't know what to tell you. Right now, you can still get them. Right now, there's no problem with them. But I don't know. It says within 60 days, they're going to have a proposed rule to make it clear when it's a stabilizing brace and when it's a short-barreled rifle. I hope it's just saying take off your stabilizing brace and now it's a pistol. Throw that away, now it's a pistol. I hope it is not using the force of law, of enforcement officers, people who can point guns at you, to say, register your gun as an SBR now. I really hope that's not what this is. It may be. And again, we don't know anything for 60 days or within 60 days. So we'll find out more about what that push means, but I don't know whether to tell you, hey, get it now or you'll never get it again, or if it's, hey, don't touch that because it'll make you a criminal in the future. I don't know. And I wish I knew what to tell you there. In terms of the rest of this stuff, I don't think it immediately affects the end consumer. I think if you're a distributor, if you're a dealer, it's going to make doing business a lot harder. Ultimately, I don't think any of this is going to reduce crime. If anything, it's going to increase crime, and there's going to be more people who are criminals for selling guns illegally because they just made many more hoops for people to jump through. But it will definitely not do anything to improve safety. It does not make any weapon safer. It does not reduce the intent of criminals, and it does not enforce gun laws that are already on the books that are being flagrantly violated. Agree with them or disagree with them, this doesn't really help step up enforcement of any of that. It's just adding more hoops for law-abiding gun owners to jump through. So I know this was a rant. I know this is a tangent, and my audience is comprised of different folks. I know some people here are probably more gun dorks than I am, who like building their own stuff, customizing their own stuff, and some people here, they have a hunting rifle and that's about it. Or some people, you just want to hear about the hiking and the camping and you don't want to hear about all this gun stuff. But it's important to talk about it because whenever something like this comes out, the assumption is that, especially when it's by the President of the United States doing all this stuff, that the assumption is that his intent is good and that the intent is to stop crime and to make the world a safer place. And unfortunately, I have to be one of many. It's nothing that I'm coming up with on my own, but I have to be one of many to tell you that this is not good. This will not make the world a safer place. This is just one step closer to the government controlling what you can do with your own property, and specifically the most powerful and the most protected property that you currently own, your firearms. I know this wasn't a fun topic, but it's an important one. Until next time, stay safe, be free, and never stop seeking adventure.